Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament. We're still in First Corinthians. Today we're going to be in First Corinthians 13, looking at love, or love being the greatest. If you're familiar with the Bible or been to a wedding or or I don't know, been around for a little bit, I think more than most people have heard of First Corinthians 13, which is known as the love chapter. And like I said yesterday, it's usually quoted or read at weddings and different things like that. But I want to give a different twist on it because a lot of times, and like I said, although it's a good thing to read at weddings and talk about with relationships and all that kind of stuff, it's actually not meant for that. Paul wasn't actually referring to marriages and things like that whenever he wrote this. Now it applies and it should be used and it's true in that situation. But he's actually using this chapter talking about gifts and using the spiritual gifts in the worship service, and then he switches to this to talk about how love is the greatest gift of all, and how this is how we need to be, and so this love that he's talking about should be the love that we see inside the church, not just in our marriages or in our relationships, but this should literally be what, when the outside world looks at the church, this is what they should see. And so we'll continue on that, and we're going to read that here in a second. But like as always, um, if you haven't subscribed to our channel, ask that you do so. That way, we publish these daily, and that way you get them. We try to publish them in the morning, and that way you get them. And if you have something to go along with, maybe with a daily reading or whatever you like to do, this is a daily reading, and so we're studying this. We're studying it chronologically, like we've talked about before. And so, just encourage anyone who would like to go ahead and subscribe. Appreciate all those who have subscribed, who follow along, who ask questions, comments, all those things. I really do appreciate everyone who takes the time to spend their day with me. I know it's 10, 15 minutes out of your day, and I do really appreciate it. So, looking at First Corinthians 13, this is a shorter chapter, just 13 verses, and so we'll look at that real quick. He says, "If I could speak all the languages of earth and of angels, but didn't love others, I would only be a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. If I had the gift of prophecy and I understood all the God's secret plans and possessed all knowledge, and if I had such faith that I could move mountains but didn't love others, I would be nothing. If I gave everything I had to the poor and even sacrificed my body, I could boast about it. But if I didn't love others, I would have gained nothing. Love is patient and kind. Love is not jealous or boastful or proud or rude. It does not demand its own way. It is not irritable, and it keeps no record of being wronged. It does not rejoice about insults, but rejoices whenever the truth wins out. Love never gives up. No, love, it never loses faith. It always is hopeful, or is always hopeful, and endures through every circumstance. Prophecy and speaking in unknown languages and special knowledge will become useless, but love will last forever. Now, our knowledge is partial and incomplete, and even the gift of prophecy reveals only part of the whole picture. But when the time of perfection comes, these partial things will become useless. When I was a child, I spoke and thought and reasoned as a child, but when I grew up, I put away childish things. Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror. But then we will see everything with perfect clarity. And that I know now, all that I know now is partial and incomplete. But then I will know everything completely, just as God knows me completely. There is three things that will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. And I love this chapter. It's just a good reminder as Christians of what who we are supposed to be, what we should look like. As a group of people. We're not going to be perfect in these, but this is just a perfect example of what Christianity is, how we should be reflecting Christ and what it should look like. And so, going back to the beginning, looking at the notes here, right? Paul kind of stops his discussion on spiritual gifts. We saw at the end of yesterday where he's like, now I'm going to give you the best way to live, right? I'm going to give you the best thing. And and he he stops, talk to kind of interrupts that to give this emphasis on love and how important it is. And so we really need to pay attention to what he's talking about here. And he's saying the most important thing for Christians is to become deeply and consistently loving people, right? And so he's saying spiritual gifts in themselves, because he mentions, he doesn't say, oh, these spiritual gifts, but he mentions the gifts, right? The speaking in tongues and all that kind of stuff, speaking in languages, prophecy. And he basically says, if I have all those things and I don't show love to people, then it's useless. And so he's saying that the spiritual gifts themselves do not define our worth to God, and or to the church, really. And in fact, apart from expression of love, all these gifts have no value. It doesn't matter how awesome you are, how good you are, or how talented you are, what awesome of gift you have. If you don't show love to people, then these are worthless. And so whatever your gifting is, if you're not loving to people, it doesn't matter. And it's worthless. And so we need to make sure that out of whatever our spiritual gift is, whatever our gifting is that we put love first in all of that. And we need to make sure that we do that. And so he talks about all the languages of earth, and this is literally the tongues of men, and then he says the tongues of angels. And like we talk about, the tongues was, and this is one of the reasons I think he mentions this one first, is tongues was the spiritual gift most highly prized by the Corinthians. We see that in chapter 12, and we're going to see it in 14 here in a minute. And so some have thought that tongues to be just the language of angels. But if we see in Acts, Luke uses the same term to refer to natural human languages. And so, like I've talked about before, and where I lean is most of the time, I believe whenever the Bible talks about people were speaking in tongues, they were speaking in known human languages that they themselves did not know, or they were interpreting a language they didn't know, but it was a human language, and stuff like that. And so, again, well, I've talked about that. Not a huge deal breaker for anything, but that's just where I lean on that. And so, um, he talks about sacrificing his body. He's like, if I sacrifice my body, I could boast about it. And I just throw this in here because it's just an interesting tidbit. Again, it doesn't matter. Some manuscripts read that he sacrificed my body to be burned instead of saying sacrifice my body, I could boast about it. And the reason they think this is here is because it would have been easy for the copyist, the person that was copying the Bible and the letters early on, to accidentally make this switch from sacrifice my body I could boast, or sacrifice my body to be burned, because the two readings only differ by one letter. And so again, it's one of those things. It's unclear which is the preferred reading. However, the manuscripts supporting the reading I could boast are generally better. I think they're a little bit older in the sense, and so usually whatever's the older is the more accurate. And again, these are little things that happen. Like I said, it's funny how in the Greek one letter can change the meaning of a of a sentence. But again, it's one of those things that it's not going to impact anything. So just wanted to throw a little tidbit in there. So then I like the interesting things like that. And so then he talks about how he would gain nothing, right? Even the most impressive sacrifice and sacrificial act means nothing if it's not motivated by love. And so he gives, right, the all these things and all these lists of things. And he's basically pointing out that the description of Christian love emphasizes the willingness to give up one's own desires, right, for the good of the others. And this is why he's emphasizing this, is because if we look back to all the way to the start of Corinthians here, there was just a lot of arrogance and a lot of self-centeredness. It was all about them, right? It's about me. It's about me. It's not about the other people. And he's saying, no, love doesn't demand its own way. Love is not self-centered. It's not concerned simply with his own interest. And so love, in contrast to the spiritual gifts, will last forever. He gets into that here in a second. But I want to go back to this. What he's saying here is like, look, y'all, if you truly love, then you're going to put other people first. If you love like Christ does, right? This is what Christ-like love looks like. And you're going to put love first. You're not going to put yourself above others with your gifts. You're not going to try to make yourself look better. You're not going to put other people down. You're not going to try to lift yourself up by knocking other people down and doing those things. And he's basically saying, if you do that stuff, then everything you're doing is worthless, right? If you don't show love behind what you're doing, everything that you're doing is worthless. And and he kind of talks about that a little bit when we talked about, I think it was all the way back to 1 Corinthians 3, when he says basically your works will be burned up. And it's like, you may be doing all these things and you're barely going to make it through, but all your work's worthless. And so he's saying the same thing here. Like, it doesn't matter what gifts you have. It doesn't matter how wonderful you are at prophecy, how good your speaking ability is, how anything, right? Singing, it doesn't matter. How whatever gifts you have, if you don't show love behind it, then everything you have is worthless. And so we need to understand that, and grab a hold of that, and understand that this is love is the most important thing. Love is the greatest, and that's what we're going to look or continue to look at here. And so love, like I said, in contrast to the spiritual gifts, will last forever. Though the spiritual gifts are going to go away. Now, um, one of the things I'll hit on it here in a minute. I'm sorry, I'll hit on it here in a minute. None of the spiritual gifts gives us a full understanding. Unlike love, they are limited in their benefits. Like we will do not have the full understanding of God, right? And in contrast between now and then, Paul talks about when we come into perfection. Now, there are some people, and I didn't put this in the notes, but there are some people who believe that the come into perfection meant that when we receive the Bible, right, or the Bible in its full thing. That's not what this means. And there's a group of people out there that believe this, that there's all the spiritual gifts are going to go away, and that once we receive the Bible, we don't need the spiritual gifts anymore, and so that's not he's talking about going to heaven, right? Once we pass on, once we go from one realm to another, once we go from the earthly realm to the heavenly realm, once everything's complete, that we'll go into perfection. That's going to be perfection. And so but some people have tried to use this to talk about how well the Bible's perfect and the different things like that. And we know, in a sense, now the Bible is the Word of God, and I believe that everything that we have from it is wonderful and great, and teaches us, and it's everything that we need for salvation and how to be a Christian. But as I just showed before, like a couple notes earlier, is it has some mistakes in it, and it's human error, things that when copying, like that we're unsure of, and so things like little things like that. Now it doesn't change, like I was talking about, none of that changes the meaning of anything, right? It may change the meaning of that particular sentence, but in the end, it doesn't change what love is, and it doesn't like nothing that we find in most of its grammatical errors and stuff like that. And so it's not perfect. And so people who use this argument that, well, we've reached the perfection in the sense that we've got the Bible, and so we no longer have the gifts of the Spirit. That's a poor argument, and I just wanted to throw that in there for anyone who's heard that and may want to look into that a little bit. But anyway, so now none of the like I said, none of the spiritual gifts gives us the full understanding, right? Unlike love, though, they all have limited in their benefits. There's no limit to the benefits of love, and so now we see things imperfectly, right? It like puzzling reflections in a mirror. In Paul's days, mirrors weren't like what we have today. Mirrors today are a perfect reflection, but back then they used a polished bronze, right? They would polish bronze really, really well until you could see a reflection, but it was not a perfect reflection. And so it would be fuzzy, right? And so our perception in this life is limited. We don't have a full understanding, and our knowledge is partial and incomplete. But then this will be the end. When perfection comes, this is the end. And when Christ establishes his eternal kingdom, we will see everything with perfectly clarity when we see him face to face, right? When we're in heaven, when that's going to be the time of perfection, we're going to have a full understanding, right? And the spiritual gifts and the that give knowledge and all that stuff will be unnecessary. All those spiritual gifts will be unnecessary. But in the end, there will be three things that remain, right? Faith, hope, and love. All three of those are going to remain. And we won't need, when we're in heaven, we won't need the spiritual gifts anymore, right? And so faith, hope, and love are more important than spiritual gifts, is what he's saying here, because they last forever. And those are the things that we need to focus on, is our faith, the hope we have in Christ, and the love that we have for others. Those are going to last forever. Those are greater than any spiritual gift that we have. And of the three of these, right, he says the greatest is love, because, and the reason is because this defines the nature of God himself. God is love. We sing songs about that, right? And so since love is the nature of God, that is the most important thing. So love should be the very center, or the very goal, or the reflection of our relationships with him and with others. And so that's what Paul's saying in this chapter when he's talking about, it's not an accident that he starts out in 11 with talking about, hey, this is the chaos going on in your worship service. These are the spiritual gifts that you have that should be using in your worship service. He's going to go into 14 on how we should be using them and how they should work. And he's like, you're arguing or trying to make each other look better or yourself be above other people because of your spiritual gift. And he's like, no, like, look at this. And then he shifts to 13 and says, hey, it doesn't matter if you have all of these gifts. And it doesn't matter if you can prophesy better than any person out there in the world. If you don't have love behind that, then it's worthless. It's useless. It's garbage. And so he emphasizes the importance of inside the church, inside the worship service, how important love is, and that we should be expressing all of these things through love. And if you're not, then your worship, your anything, all that is worthless. And so that's his emphasis here. And like I said, I know a lot of people use this, and it can apply, right, to marriages and other relationships. But his main goal, his main focus, with 1 Corinthians 13 here, is saying, hey, love, this is what love should look like. This is what the relationship should look like inside the church. And we need to make sure that we're doing this, and this is our main focus, and this is our goal, and this is what it should look like. So tomorrow, what we're going to do is then he shifts back into, all right, he finishes talking about love here, and then he shifts back into the gifts of tongues and prophecy, and the importance of both, but how more important prophecy is. And so he shifts back into that, and then he'll finish 14, which we'll look at here in a couple of days, of how basically he started with in chapter 11 with the disorder of worship. And so he then takes and wraps all these things together, talks about them, and then he's going to wrap them together in the end of what orderly worship, or a call to orderly worship, and what worship should be like, and certain people who should be silent in the worship service, and how everything should be done in a proper order, and so without chaos. And we're going to look at that. And so I hope y'all are enjoying this study. I am. I'm learning from it. And more than anything, just want to thank everyone who has taken the time to watch. And I hope y'all have a wonderful day.